Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Pune Parsafar, and I'm really happy to be here presenting my research and my film, which is at its final stage. Let me share my screen, and you can see my PowerPoint. My PhD is a practice-based project containing a feature-length documentary titled Iranian Women Unveiled. How the idea started. The idea for my film and my research started from observation and then critical thinking, both as a consumer of films and my own professional experience in documentary filmmaking and broadcasting. The images that I was presented with in the movies that I saw, I found at odds with my own experience as a woman from Iran and with the reality of the lives of the women in that society, as I know them from my own personal experience. Broadly speaking, there are three perspectives on representation of Iranian women in cinema. One is the Orientalist / cultural relativist, mainly seen in the cinema in the West, especially in Hollywood, movies in the Hollywood. The second one is the traditional, conservative, and religious perspective seen in the official cinema in Iran. And the third one is the emancipatory feminist perspective, mainly seen in the cinema of the underground and diaspora, Iranian diaspora. The women seen in the films with these ideologies behind them are mainly shown as helpless victims, submissive wives, concubines, traditional homemakers, devout Muslims, belly dancers, and conservative homemakers dependent on the man, meek, God-fearing, chaste, and the sinner. She can be a victim at best, and at worst, the cause of man's temptation and downfall. The third one, the feminist and emancipatory perspective, shows departures from the traditional perspective. So the perspective, these departures from the traditional perspectives that have dominated Iranian cinema, specifically in dealing with the portrayal of women and issues of religion, gender, and sexuality. Here, there is a greater correspondence with the lives and issues of present-day Iranian women. Women deal with issues such as compulsory hijab, women's sexuality, marriage, age of marriage, child abuse, right to divorce, custody of children, equal access to employment, inheritance, and the penal code. My own documentary and research sits within this emergent critical movement in art and cinema in Iran. This alternative, my film offers an alternative. This alternative is a progressive, anti-discriminatory, and empowered representation of Iranian women in cinema, an intervention which cracks the status quo. My film has an exclusively female participants from Iran who have proven track records of opposing the Islamic regime in Iran. As a result of this, they all live in exile in Europe as political refugees. My film is in 6 discrete episodes, each about one woman. They all together represent important areas of social protest, in the current Iranian society. Here, I'd like to show you an extract from the episode Shahla. She is a workers' rights activist, and here she talks about a better world.
تصویرم از اون جامعه اینه که آدم ها شاد باشن، آدم ها حرمت داشته باشن، انسانیت شاخص باشه، رفاه باشه، برابری باشه، تبعیض نباشه، زن و مرد برابر باشن، خرافه نباشه، نمیدونم کسی رو به خاطر مذهب محاربه با خدا و نمیدونم چی نزنن بهش و سرکوب کنن جامعه رو. بعضا میگن اینا اوتوپیه. چطور این کثافت سرمایه‌داری و ترامپ و اینا اوتوپی نیست؟ اینا قابل قبوله، ولی وقتی از یه جامعه خوب حرف میزنیم اوتوپیه، خیال پردازیه. اینو میگن برای اینکه ما رو عقب بزنن، میگن نمیشه. خب تا وقتی که سیاست دست اینا باشه راست میگن نمیشه، و برای اینکه بشه و سیاست در دست اینا بیرون کشید، اینا رو کنار زد. بنابراین باید این مبارزه ادامه پیدا کنیم و به درجه که ما اینا رو از سیاست کنار بزنیم، بورژوازی رو کنار بزنیم، سرمایه‌داری رو کنار بزنیم، همون درجه میشه.
Choosing women activists as my participants was a decision to construct an image of Iranian women which challenges the stereotypical representations, often as good, submissive housewives, both in numerous films of the Iranian official cinema and in the Western fiction. In my film, the women appear in settings which challenge the gender conceptualizations of the workplace, showing women in a wider range of roles, positioned as active and not passive, and freed from the typical conventions of subservient roles to men. My documentary explores representation of women in cinema around a number of key themes, such as women's bodies, women's voice, dance, music, and use of color. Women's free expression in all these areas comes into conflict with the misogynistic laws and institutions in place in Iran. The cinematic forms and devices that I employ aim to allow an actually existing empowered image of the Iranian women to emerge. Right after the Islamic regime came to power in Iran in March 1979, the woman in cinema, TV, and print was effectively erased. And when she came back, her body was veiled, mostly in black and dark colors. After the imposition of compulsory hijab in public, the typical image of the woman here mirrors the perspective and ideal of the religious and political establishment. My camera focuses on events by women, such as meetings, rallies, conferences, and organizations whose agendas revolve around women's rights and human rights. Here, I'd like to show you another extract from my film. This is from episode Mariam, and she's talking about women's rights and human rights.
اینه که یه تصویر قوی از زن بده. چه انتظار داری از یه همچین فیلمی؟ چهره‌ای که از زن می‌بینیم خیلی اوقات قدرتمند نیست، جزوی از مرد سالاریه. کمتر نقشایی هست که زن نقش اولا بازی میکنه و نقشی که چند بعدیه. زن خیلی اوقات یک بعدی میشه دید، به عنوان یک بدن فقط، بدون سیاستش، بدون فکرش، بدون اون نقشی که بازی میکنه در تغییر محیطش.
Freedom of conscience includes, of course, the right to religion, but it also includes the right to reject religion. Islamophobia is a term that's being used in order to silence criticism, in order to impose de facto blasphemy laws where none exist. Thank you very much, but we don't need a lesson in racism. We live racism every day. But for those of you who say, and I'm talking to the world outside, who say that our criticisms are Islamophobic and racism, you need a lesson in racism. Because isn't it racist to say that people who come from the Middle East, from North Africa, from South Asia, from the diaspora, people who come from Muslim families, that we don't also have the right to think and live as we choose? Of course we do.
Back to my PowerPoint. In my film, I aim to reinforce female agency by telling the narratives of women as agents of change. These women galvanize people into action, into change. The lives of the women in my film are a selection from many, many more lives, which reflect also fragments of my own character, my own history. The women are the founders, heads, and the speakers of their organizations, and they make real changes in people's lives as well as their own. The key actors who are given roughly equal weight during this story and which stress a sense of collectivity and community. These women, while they share a commonality in what they do, the specific area each covers is the focus of separate narratives. Each of these domains protagonists complement the others, and they all link up as a patchwork to build the bigger narrative for the documentary. Here I have included a slide of my transport, and because I traveled around the UK and Europe, and I was free to do that. That's in contrast to the laws in Iran under the Islamic regime, that women can't even hold a passport without a written permission from their husbands if they are married, and or their male guardians in their family, if not. I appear in my film and I change hands. I'm shown in different roles as the director, the producer, behind the camera as the cinematographer, doing the sound, the lighting, interviewing, and also editing. And this has been for different reasons. One, because there was no budget. Another one, because of the confidentiality, and because the women in my film are all political activists, and I didn't want to share their addresses and whereabouts with anybody else. And also the decision to include myself in this frame was a deliberate choice to position myself alongside the other protagonists as someone who has lived through a similar experience, and also someone who is engaged in the same battle. That was my presentation, and that was my research. Hope you liked it, and thank you for listening and watching my work, my presentation. And I look forward to your comments and questions.